Hello, I'm Stacy and welcome back to the channel. I'm yet to do my media book tag and it's a little bit past the media, but here we are. We're going to be looking at the good, the bad, and everything in between when it comes to all the books that I have read so far in 2025. Okay, so let's jump right into it. I have 8 questions in total, so I think this is gonna be a short and sweet video. Let me just open. If you see me looking down, I am looking at my computer. That is where the questions are. And I'm also gonna open Goodreads just to have like a view of everything I've read, just in case I forget something. 13 books behind, guys. I'm supposed to have read 25 books and I've only read 15 books so far. So question number 1 is, what is the best book that you've read so far in 2025? I know this question is only asking for 1 book, but I have 3 because I read 3 really good books. The first one being As Long as Lemon Trees Grow. We are following our main character Salama, who was a pharmacy student just before war broke out in her country, which is Syria. When we meet Salama, she is volunteering as a doctor in the remaining hospital in Syria, and that's because everything else has basically been destroyed. The focal point of this story is not necessarily the war, it is the average everyday people and how they live their lives now that they have to live in a country that is at war. Shifting the narrative to the average everyday person and how they are affected by war and how their days and just lives in general are shaped, I think is what made this book such an enduring story to read. It shines a light on the small moments that we might overlook in life, and it highlights how important they are and how sometimes it is a privilege to have certain things. The story focuses on the kids who manage to find joy and play with each other, even though a few hours ago a bomb just dropped in their neighborhood and nobody knows when the next one is gonna happen, but it will happen for sure. We see the doctors who have a choice to maybe escape their country and seek asylum in another country, but they choose to stay and help the injured. The shopkeeper who wakes up and opens his or her shop even though his supplies are like halfway through and there's no way of getting any more. Through these characters, we see the presence of hope and how it never dies even when you are in the most dire of circumstances. These people continue to fight for the country that they believe they should have. It was very heartbreaking to read, but it was very heartwarming to read at the same time. It blew my mind how this story was crafted in such a delicate and thoughtful way, and I just fell in love with this book. And I'm sure if you've watched my previous videos, you already know all of this because I've been gushing about this book in I think the last 3 videos. And the next book is a book called Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, and this is a book about friendships that last a long time and how these friendships shape us and impact our lives. We are following our main characters Sam and Sadie, and they met as kids. They bonded over a video game, and later on they meet again when they are in university, and this time they decide to build a video game together. It becomes their shared business, and because they have this thing that keeps them together, we get to see how they navigate their friendship and how it grows and changes over time. I love this book because it felt very realistic. Their friendship was not depicted as anything perfect, even though it was a friendship that lasted a very long time. It had a lot of ups and downs that felt so real, and I loved that. I loved how the characters were flawed in ways that would make you want to hate them, but then when you think about it a little bit more, you realize how human this is, because sometimes even in the best of people, something that's ugly or not so great can be part of their character, or it can be part of who they are in certain moments, but it doesn't mean that these moments define you. And I love this book for depicting such a friendship. I love this book for showcasing a platonic relationship and showcasing a different kind of love that I feel is never highlighted as much as it should be in books, in film, in television. And the last book is Tomorrow Died Yesterday. This book is a book that I'm putting on this list just because of how well it was written, and it shared such a powerful story. In many ways, I would liken it to As Long as Lemon Trees Grow, because whereas As Long as Lemon Trees Grow is focusing on a war-torn country in Syria, Tomorrow Died Yesterday focuses on a war-torn country in Nigeria. The differences I would say is where As Long as Lemon Trees Grow gave me hope. Tomorrow Died Yesterday is more hard-hitting and more brutal, but it's a story that is so impactful and worth reading, and really another author that I found myself in awe of how he crafted this narrative and his ability to craft characters who felt so real. The second question is, what has been your favorite sequel so far this year? I have not read many book series, so really with this question, I only have one book that I can point to, but I'm not mentioning it because it's the only book on my list that is a sequel. I am mentioning it because it does deserve this title, and that book is The Dragon Republic by Arif Kwan. I did a whole reading vlog on the popular series, and I talked about the first book being written so well, but also feeling like it's a bit of an unimaginative story in the sense that I felt like everything I was reading was something I had read in the past. With that said, I'll also still mention I recognize that is because I am reading this book this year. Perhaps if I read it when it was first released, it would have been more impactful. But when it came to the second book, I found myself enjoying it much more than the first book. I'd still say the story doesn't feel like it's anything new, but it's a story that was written so well. And I also have to say that the second book is so good because the first book laid the foundation for the second book, and I found myself enjoying the second book so much that of course I continued the rest of the series. So Dragon Republic by Arif Kwan is my favorite sequel of the first half of the year. Is there a new release that you haven't read yet but you're very excited to? And yes, there are so many good books that are coming out or have come out this year. And oh my god, it's a case of so little time yet there's so much to read. But for this question, I will mention two books. I am so excited to read Sangu Mandana's new book, and that is A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping. And I am also very excited to read Arif Kwan's new book, which is Catabasis. And I do think I have a third book on this list, and this is the book being published by the YouTuber Janani through her publishing imprint. And I think the title of that book is Dust Settles Not. When it comes to A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping, I want to read it so bad because I read Sangu Mandana's first book, which is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, and I loved that book. It is for sure a comfort book. If you're feeling like you just want something that is very magical, very whimsical, very cozy fantasy is what it is. Something that is reminiscent of real life, but it puts a very happy and a very fun world and atmosphere to be in, then this is the book. And simply for those reasons that I loved her first book, I want to read everything else that she puts out. When it comes to Arif Kwan and Catabasis, it's the same case. I read her book Yellowface and I loved it. I admire her writing so much. You can just tell this is somebody who went to school and studied the craft of writing. I haven't looked up her academic credentials, but I wouldn't be shocked if I see that she studied creative writing or something of that nature. And lastly, Dust Settles North is a book that came to my attention through the YouTuber Janani, and I love her content so much. And every time she describes this book, it sounds so wonderful. It sounds like a book that is full of so much depth. It sounds like a book that depicts a story that shows something worthwhile about humanity. And I'm so curious and I just have to read it. The next question is, what is your most anticipated book of the year? And for this, there are so many, because I know I created a whole list of books that I'm looking forward to read this year. But the first one that jumps to mind is again Catabasis by Arif Kwan. But aside from that, there are other titles that I do want to read this year. I just cannot remember their names or the authors, so I will put some of them on the screen. But if you're really curious, I did do a whole video of 25 books that I want to read in 2025, so feel free to check that out for book recs. The fifth question, what is your biggest disappointment so far? So this is one that I never saw coming. I was certain that I would love anything that this author puts out, but that just wasn't the case, and that was very shocking to discover. For context, this author's book is one of the books that got me back into reading, and it is a book that I will forever recommend, that I always say is 5 stars. So when he released a new book this year, I just couldn't have imagined that I would end up not enjoying it. And the book is The Emperor of Gladness by Ocean Vuong. Ocean Vuong is an amazing writer, but for whatever reason, I did not connect to this book at all. we're following a main character whose name I cannot even remember at this point, because that is how inconsequential this entire book felt to me. And it's also how insignificant I felt the character was written. The story was not focused on the main character. Instead, it felt like it was focused on a lot of things surrounding the main character, and these things didn't necessarily connect together to build a bigger picture of something that would have been more impactful. What this book felt like is that prior to being presented as a book, it was just chunks of pieces of writing that alone were really good, but they didn't have a complete narrative. And it honestly felt like they were just glued together or forced together, and then this was called the book The Emperor of Gladness. So this book turned out to be a book that I did not enjoy at all. It's a book that sadly I feel like in a couple of weeks, a couple of months, I'll have completely forgotten about it. But I will say On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong, which is the first book I ever read by this author, is something that remains my favorite. I don't know, has anyone read this book? And if you have, did you read his previous book, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous? Did you love that one? And if you loved that one, what did you think about this one? But aside from this book, there are two other books that I did not enjoy as much as I thought I would. And the other book is The Tale of Small Fortunes. This book got me because of the cover. It's just very mesmerizing. It's very captivating, and the minute I saw it, I just wanted to read the book simply because of the cover. But the story itself was very boring in my opinion. Nothing ever really happened, and I think this author has the makings of somebody who can write a really nice, cozy fantasy story, because this is what it was meant to be. But this story for me was just a miss. I need a bit more friction. I need the characters to have a little bit going on, a little bit of action, even within the confines of cozy fantasy. The next book that I read is a book that is set in South Africa, and I was so excited because this was the first book I was ever reading set in South Africa, but it was such a disappointment. It's another book that when I see 5 stars, I just can't comprehend where the person giving it 5 stars is coming from. This book had a main female character who, honestly, if you switch her out with a robot, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference, and that's how badly the character was written. She does not feel human. She doesn't make any decisions that make sense, but she's also depicted as somebody who is a genius, a really brilliant girl. It's a coming of age story, and she's the type of character that does really well in school, we can even say, without really trying. But then we have conflicting situations where she makes decisions that make absolutely no sense. Even for your average everyday person, I do not feel those are decisions that a human being who is able to observe a situation and apply critical thinking would make. And that was one of the things that irked me. Another thing was things being built up to seem like there's something so big, but when the conclusion or the climax of the story arrives, it's so underwhelming. And even when you didn't believe the build-up that was being created, the conclusion still sucks. All around, I really didn't enjoy this book, but I found myself appreciating the parts of history that were imbued in this. I'd still be curious and very excited to pick up another book from South Africa and just learn more about how South African characters are depicted in literature. The next question is, what is your biggest surprise so far? My biggest surprise is how there is so much African literature to explore, and how little of that I have read. When I started this booktube journey and the journey of being a reader, I was mainly reading popular books, and those books rarely ever include diverse reads. So when I intentionally started exploring books from other parts of the world, I found so many good reads. And in Africa specifically, I found that there's so much that is very fun to read, very relatable. And I realized that I had this biased opinion that the only books that exist when it comes to African literature are the kind of books that I would read in high school. And at that time, of course, I never appreciated those books. And now as an adult, intentionally picking up African literature, I am learning that there's so many diverse books you can read, and so many books that are relatable. They're not all centered on colonization or black pain, which I was another impression that most books are like that, but I was so wrong. Or they're not centered on characters in the village or something like that. There's nothing wrong with any of those themes, but sometimes it can feel overwhelming to constantly read about that. But in intentionally exploring African literature, I found so much more, and My journey has just started. I'm still in the beginning stages. I've still read a few countable books that are African literature, but I am so excited to see what else I discover. Not just in African literature, but just by intentionally reading books from any part of the world. Question number 7 is, what is a book that made you cry? This year, I haven't read a book that has made me cry. Yes, I know I've mentioned certain books that have a lot of heavy subject matter, but they haven't pushed me to the point of shedding actual tears. I think the last time I read a book and cried was when I read A Little Life by Hanya Nagihara. Beyond that, there's no book that has brought me to tears. In looking at this question right now, I realize I have been reading books that have difficult themes or sad themes. So I actually do not have a book that has made me happy, because everything that I've been reading so far has been very sad. But I'm hoping to change that. Next on my reading list is Kiki's Delivery Service. So I've started watching Ghibli movies and I've realized that a lot of them are based on books. So I want to read the books first before I continue watching any movies. So far I've watched Kiki's Delivery Service, the animation, and I also watched Howl's Moving Castle, and both of those animations are based on books, so I'm very excited to read those. Another book that I'm looking forward to read is this book that I know I will butcher the name if I say it, so I will just put it on the screen. I've watched a couple of reviews about it and everyone says it's a very wonderful story to read, so looking forward to it. And we're down to the last question, and this is, what books do I want to read by the end of the year? Honestly, I have so many on my list, and I don't know, if I was to pick one thing, I'd say I want to start reading classics. So at the end of the year, I want to at least have read one classic. I think I will start with Pride and Prejudice because I want to watch the movie, but I'm not going to watch it until I've read the book. So one book that I want to read by the end of the year is Pride and Prejudice. And that is it for my mid-year book tag. If you have your own answers to some of these questions, feel free to leave them on the comment section below. I'm so curious to see what people loved, what people didn't love, and what you're looking forward to reading as the year continues. With that said, thank you for watching, and don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you're into bookish content.